from the swing theory?
No, no theory. No theory. Just wanted people to attend the talk, but there's no theory. So before I begin, I have some good news and some bad news. The bad news is that we cannot visit the Old City tomorrow. There was supposed to be a trip of the attendees to the Old City, but due to the other competing conference that we have around here, the Old City is going to be closed for everybody but people who inhabit the Old City. So instead of that, and this is the good news, we're going to have wine down here and some things to munch with the wine. So after the last talk tomorrow, we'll have punch and wine and things to eat. Okay. Oh. How did we get there? Okay. So the myth of conscious thought, a view from swing theory, and as I already said, there's no theory. It's a framework. It's a way of thinking. I don't know. It's not theory per se. And what I'm going to do here today is a little risky because I fear some of you are going to think that what I'm going to say in the first 15 minutes of my talk is trivially true. The rest of you are likely to think that it's trivially false. And if you talk about it, over coffee after the talk, and you're just going to say one word, you'll end up thinking that it's trivial. So just say two words. Okay? Trivially true or trivially false. If you go from an idiot to complete idiot, so you can stop at one word. But if it's about triviality, then go on. Just 2 slides of definitions. We talk about consciousness in many different ways. I just want to say that today I'll be talking about consciousness in a very simple sense. Are you aware of seeing this phone? If your answer is yes, then you're aware of seeing this phone. I have no doubt about that. If your answer is no, it's more complicated. But if I give you a drug that will make you tell me all the truth and nothing but the truth, and you become highly motivated to tell me the truth, and you swear to God that you don't see a phone here, then I'll trust you that you don't see a phone here despite of the fact that it's in front of your eyes. So this is the way I'm going to use conscious and unconscious processes today. A thought, I would say, is a series of symbolic units that creates a relational structure, things like I love you, or life is not a military blanket. These are thoughts. Don't give me this face. Life is not a military blanket. Haven't you heard it? So if I love, thinking is moving from one thought to the other, right? So if I love you, maybe the next thought should be, maybe it is time that I propose, or maybe it is time that I tell you that I love you. And if life is not a military blanket, is the thought that you have, maybe the next thought is maybe it doesn't stink. But at the same, it can be maybe it's not green, maybe it's not all sorts of things. Maybe it's why I love you. Yeah. Some people argue that they have non-verbal thoughts. I don't have them. Einstein did. So here's a non-visual thought. And here's a non-visual thinking process. So we're moving from Lionel on this flying donkey to me on this flying donkey. And here's the thought process going on. Nothing of what I'm going to say here today hinges on the fact that I'm going to be talking about verbal thoughts. If you want to think about visual thoughts, you can do that too. So what I want to argue today, either simply true or either simply false, I don't know, is that the formation of all thoughts is non-conscious. Okay, so you don't form your thoughts consciously. That the formation of all thinking is non-conscious, and I think that for practical reasons we might want to be thinking about decision making too. It might be more tractable than trying to think about thoughts. That if we needed another metaphor for consciousness research, and I think we didn't, but I just want to add one nevertheless, we'd better think about consciousness as a computational medium, not a processor, not something that does things, not as an organ, not anything of this sort. And that thought and thinking involve conscious and non-conscious processes, which is something we kind of neglect. We know in the background. This is what happens, but things become conscious, they stay in consciousness, disappear from consciousness. They might completely disappear from your brain or stay there non-consciously and then they emerge to consciousness again. And this interplay between conscious and unconscious processes gives us the narratives that we use in daily life. And these don't have to be, the extended narratives of who I am and where I come from. It can be just like, what am I doing here, and why am I staring at Leon, and so on and so forth. But I have a story to tell, a small story to tell. Informed by previous presentations, let me tell you what I'm not going to be saying here. So if you get out of the talk thinking that said one of these things, then I'm not. Okay? So I'm not saying we're always unaware of our thoughts. I'm just saying that there might be non-conscious thoughts, but I'm not saying we're all unaware of all of them. I don't argue that we cannot become conscious of the processes that we call reasoning or thinking of that sort. I think we can. There's tons of data in the literature to suggest that we're really bad at it, and that it's much more like an inference. So when I think about my thinking processes, it's more like an inference, more like me thinking about Leon's thinking. And I'm not going to say anything about the consciousness doesn't have a function. I am going to suggest that we might ask the question differently. That it's not the most fruitful question to ask, but I'm going to say that it has no function. So I'm in no way suggesting that you all might be zombies bereft of any phenomenology out there, unlike me, whose phenomenology I know. Okay, so let's begin. And please feel free to interfere while the talk. It's kind of nice. Thoughts. So here's our little lovely brain, and it's firing, and it does all sorts of things, and it's whatever networks and what have you. And here's the thought. And the question that we're asking ourselves is, what's going on between the brain and the thought? And I don't mean to cross the physical mental boundary here. So if you want to think about it as a brain state that is this thought, that you can think about it as this brain state. You know, it's not the crossing of the boundaries that I care about. One way to think about it is something like this. There's noise in the brain, tons of noise in the brain, and more noise and more noise and more noise. And then at some point, I have a thought. Okay? I hear there are dualists in the audience today. Where is our dualist? Oh, you're here. 2. Probably 3. Oh, more than I thought. And maybe probably like a few more, in the closet. We'll have a corner for you at the end. So if you're a dualist, you can live with that. I think most of us cannot, and I think that even dualists can think about it in terms of this entire thing in the mental, and still do not tend to agree that this is a reasonable way of portraying what's going on. We kind of tend to think about these things in this way. So there's noise, and then something happens. We actually know very little about how thoughts are formed. So it might be words, and they might be organized a little bit, and then at some point, the thought becomes conscious, and we experience it. One way to think about these processes is as accumulation of evidence. So there's a thought there, and the thought accumulates evidence towards crossing the threshold of consciousness and then becoming aware. The processes are much more complex than that. So we have, this is the thought forming, and this is the evidence for consciousness. But for my purposes today, it'll be enough to think about it in this way. And what I want to do is I want to focus you here on just 13 milliseconds before the thought becomes conscious and 13 milliseconds after it becomes conscious. Okay, and there are basically 2 options, right? Either you have the thought before it becomes conscious, and there's something that happens and it becomes conscious, or you don't. Now, you don't might mean that you have nothing, or that it might be kind of 90%-ish kind of the thought that you have. Okay, but the 10% are in this, are added in the stage where you become conscious. Now, it is tempting to suggest that we have this 10%, but I just want to remind you that you didn't like this thing. You didn't like the miracle that happened here, a slide ago between noise and a thought. So you shouldn't like it here. You shouldn't like it here. When you cross the border, something happens and the thought becomes what it is. Okay? It kind of doesn't make sense, I think. Okay? I'll use some illustrations. We'll play some games. I'm between a cognitive neuroscientist and a computational neuroscientist, so I'll give you some break and then we'll play some games. Nick, I'm going to pick up on you, okay? Can you read from there? Okay, good. So this is Maya Bar-Hillel, and she's been looking at and developing riddles she calls stumpers. And they're called stumpers for a reason, because they get people stuck. Okay? So here's a stumper that she gave me. James is a successful divorce lawyer. Many years ago, he spent a few days in hospital. Upon his discharge, he was in perfect health, 100 sound in body and mind. Nonetheless, he was incapable of leaving his hospital bed on his own and had to be carried off. How come? Now, before you answer, I'm going to say, I'm going to interrupt you when you start talking. I'm going to be my Israeli self and interrupt you from time to time.
You're really putting me on the spot.
Now.
Mistaken assumptions.
What?
Mistaken assumptions.
What's the assumptions?
He was found in 100% in body and mind.
No. Maya, you know Maya, as good as I. She never lies. He was 100% healthy.
He was in love with the doctor.
He could not. He was incapable of getting up. If he were in love with the doctor, he could have, but he could have chosen not to. Yes? Why? He was 100% sound in body. Oh, there's a law of the hospital. He was incapable in the sense that, that's a good, so they're like policemen were like holding him. He was incapable of getting out of the bed.
He was asleep.
He was asleep. No. Yes. Exactly. He was a baby. He was a very young baby. Okay? And this is what, and Maya knows how to create these things. So she puts the assumptions into your thinking, and we all get stuck. But I use the stumper here, A, because it's fun, and B, because all kinds of thoughts came to your mind, but you didn't make them come. Okay? Right? What? A baby. He was a baby. Many years ago, he was in the hospital. He couldn't get up. He was 2 months old. Okay? Now, Maya is so sophisticated that she chooses the names. So this is an old name. It's not a young name. So anyway, so the basic idea I wanted just to illustrate here is that thoughts come to mind. It's not like you thought there and you made the thoughts come. So all of you had all sorts of thoughts, and it happened to you. They came to you. Okay. Other examples are Jane learned to read and write at the age of 3. She's now applying to colleges. What is her GPA? We know that people tend to say that her GPA is high, somewhere between 3.5 and 4. Many things can happen between the age of 3 and applying to colleges. There's no way in which it's a necessary thought. You could have thought to yourself, oh, well, I don't know, she might have been sick at the age of 4. You could have thought, well, who knows? Maybe she had bad experiences at school and she dropped out. You could have thought, I'm not going to answer these questions. All of these things could have come to your mind, but they did not. So your non-conscious processes shaped your conscious thought. It's in this multi-dimensional space of possibilities. And I'm not arguing that all of the choices were considered and ruled out. I'm just saying that there's a carving to be made that end up in your conscious thoughts. And this carving, you don't do consciously. You do non-consciously. Will Alex be a good scientist? He's amazingly creative and very intelligent. He might, but he might not. People tend to say that it's likely that he will, but it takes much more than that to be a good scientist. And what about Tori, who jumped from the 19th floor? How well is he doing? So he's probably not doing very well. But still, the thought comes to mind. And we know in these kinds of inferences, you make them without knowing even that you make them. So even if the word dead does not happen to you consciously, it can be used as a cue for retrieval, and it's much more efficient than any of the other words in the sentence. Okay? Thoughts that come from nowhere happens to all of us in the morning when we wake up. The first conscious thought is just that. It's the first conscious thought. It's not preceded by any other conscious thought. And it's formed by your non-conscious processes for you. Insights happen in the shower for some reason. And one of the important features of insights is that they get there. They just pop out. You become aware of them. You don't consciously form them. So basic point 1 is that thoughts become conscious. We don't consciously make them. Let's move to thinking. So this is Asael Sklar. Sits back in the back there. Amazing postdoc. Currently at the job market. If you guys happen to have a job, you'll be lucky to have him. And we've developed these kind of examples together a while ago. So how do we do math, like 12 times 13? This is an example Danny Kahneman uses in his book, and Stan uses a similar example, I don't remember the numbers exactly, as the best examples of conscious thinking, right? we do math. So what I'll do now in the next 2 minutes is a microanalysis of how we do math. And by microanalysis, I mean I'll zoom in and I'll move slowly. Okay, I'll do slow-mo. So 12 times 13. Okay? Up there you have your conscious processes. Down there you have the laborers of your non-conscious processes. And the first thing that occurs to you when you see the example, 12 times 13, is that, I can do it this way or that way. Again, like the examples we considered before, you could have chopped the question in very many different ways. It doesn't have to be this way. It could have been many other ways. You could have just thought about 12 times 10. You could have thought to yourself, nah, I'm not doing it today. You could have thought, oh, it's easier for me to do 4 times 13 and then 9 times 13. Who knows, okay? But this thought pops to mind, and then something happens, and then you decide, okay, let's go with 12 times 10. Okay? Why do you decide? You don't know. It's a thought that occurred to you. But now we have a thinking process. We moved from one thought to another thought via the hard work of your non-conscious processes. Hard work again, and then you have the results, and then hard work again, and then you have the end result. So this is how you do math. You have conscious thoughts about outcomes in the middle, but the action itself happens in your non-conscious processes. Now you might think to yourself, well, this is math. We have scripts for math, so my non-conscious processes can follow the scripts, but it's very limited. And so let's consider another example. Lucy, I'm going to pick on you now. Will you marry me? What? Exactly. So one thought that might come to mind is, you're not a military blanket. I'm not going to marry you. And so, yes, that's one thought. Lucia could have run away. She could have come, here and just hug me. She could have, shouted. All sorts of things she could have done. But she did what she did, and not because she thought very carefully about what she's doing. Okay? And so let's assume for a second that she would not immediately reject me, and that she'll sit down there and think about the pros and cons of marrying me, assuming that there are pros. I'm not sure it's true. But, so it's a thought. And why would someone stop to say, okay, I'll think about the pros and the cons, is unclear, but it happens, and now she does it. And now she might think, okay, but here's this disadvantage X or advantage X, what does it mean in terms of, marrying him? And so on and so forth. So you see, there's a thinking process where we are aware of the outcomes of the non-conscious processes. We have conscious thoughts, but they're chained non-consciously. Why do we think in the first place that thinking is conscious and that thoughts become conscious? I think is very easy to understand. It's really, we have an inherent availability bias because when we consciously think, and this is how we consciously think about our thoughts, right? When we're talking about conscious episodes in which we're thinking. And when we consciously think, we only have evidence for conscious thoughts and we only have evidence for non-conscious thinking. If you have non-conscious thought when you think about thinking, you're not consciously thinking about your non-conscious thoughts. Because if you were thinking about your non-conscious thought, they would become conscious. Okay. Let's see if I can say it again. If you're consciously thinking about your thoughts, okay? It was a non-conscious thought. Okay. So, yes?
That's right, because you can be aware of the end of your thought, and then you have to infer that you had an unconscious thought that was the beginning of the thought. It happens often.
Say that again?
You're often conscious of only the end of your thought, like the end of a sentence or the end of a song or whatever, and you realize that you were thinking about it before, but you were not aware of it.
But you didn't have the beginning. So when you're thinking about your conscious thoughts, you didn't have the beginning. So let's assume there are two thoughts, okay? I don't understand the questions. How do I go about answering it? Two thoughts. But I'm only aware of the second one. I cannot count the first one. I'm not aware of it.
You're aware of
By
it.
definition, I cannot count it, right?
You're aware of it with hindsight. It's like iconic memory. You can put your attention on it and then you retrieve
But
it. It must have been there if I had the second thought.
So maybe there's some evidence. If there is one, I don't think it's very strong. Well, but anyway, only need is a strong bias, and the strong bias is there. And so looking at one side of the evidence is nice, but if you do that, if you look at the stock market, you might think that Trump is an amazing president. He's been doing extremely well in the last 3 years, but I suggest that you don't look only at the stock market, and don't just look at the evidence that comes to you when you consciously think about your thoughts. So thinking becomes conscious, and we don't consciously make it, is my second point. Now, the non-theory theory for swing is a frame of thinking, and it begins by the argument that I just developed, that thought and thinking are formed unconsciously. And by that, I mean that every conscious experience you have is formed unconsciously. So I don't mean to limit myself to thoughts and thinking. Emotions, motivations, decisions, they all come to you. They're all formed unconsciously. You are aware of the result of the process, not of the process itself. And if we want to understand these kinds of things, and I think most of us in the audience are, then we have to seriously take non-conscious processes. And when I say seriously, I mean it in at least two different ways. One of them is that we have to shift some of what we do into the unique powers of unconscious processes. So most of us, me too, of course, for many years we've done, the following thing. Oh, I can do math consciously. Can I do math non-consciously? I can inhibit stuff consciously. Can I do it non-consciously? So we started by thinking about what consciousness does, and then we asked, well, whether non-conscious processes can do that. But if we want to seriously take non-conscious processes, we have to begin with non-conscious processes. And I think that the only field that I know of that has seriously taken it is implicit learning and statistical learning. These guys are looking at things, we can debate on how non-conscious they are, but they're implicit in many, many ways. And there are things that you cannot do consciously. And Katrina today gave you an example for other things that are better done non-consciously than consciously, right? So I think we should move there. We should do more of the dynamics thing between non-conscious and conscious processes. Unfortunately, in real life, this is what usually happens. We don't just see stuff and then never see it again. And then if we want to understand animals and we want to understand where things are coming from, then we should do non-conscious processes in animals and babies and what have you. Okay. Leon, how am I doing on time? 5. At least. I need 20. Can I take 20? No. So a few more points, and then I want to share with you some data, but this thing is not playing. Right? Okay. So if it's this guy, and this guy is running in the water, and then he's running out of the water, and his running is not the same thing. Okay? And you won't argue that the function of the water is to make the guy run slower or to make it more difficult to lift the legs, right? So I suggest we should think in the same way about conscious and non-conscious processes. It's not the case that consciousness has a function, that it does something. It's a medium in which thoughts happen, in which emotions happen, and this medium shapes the thoughts and the emotions in one way if it's conscious, and another if it's non-conscious. But it doesn't have a function per se. It's not something that does something. We won't talk about the differences between conscious and non-conscious thought, because I want to tell you briefly about two projects that we've been doing that both have inspired this kind of thinking and were inspired by it. So the first project has to do with taking seriously the function of bringing things to consciousness. When do people become aware of stuff? You met Asael. You actually met Yaniv in one of Daphna's. Where's Daphna? She's somewhere. Huh? Daphna. In Daphna's last slide, he's a graduate student at her lab. And this is a project that we've been all doing for a while. And I'm going to show you evidence for individual differences in the speed of non-conscious prioritizing information for conscious experiences. Now, we use CFS. We've talked about CFS multiple times in the last 2 days, so I won't say much about it. We bombard one eye with tons of movement. Then whatever we put in the other eye, we're not aware of, until at some point we become aware of this thing. And this is exactly what we're measuring. We're measuring when do things break suppression, when do we become aware of the stimulus that is masked in CFS. What you see here is data from, I don't know, by now we have well over 10 studies, I think. And the details are really unimportant, but I'll walk you just through one of them, and the rest are the same. So this is one experiment. We masked happy facial expressions and neutral facial expressions, okay? And this is breaking time of happy facial expressions and of neutral facial expressions, and each point is a subject, okay? This is what you have to understand about this graph. That's it. And so you can see that there's an amazing correlation. Subjects that are fast with happy faces are fast with neutral faces. Subjects that are slow with happy faces are slow for neutral expressions. And it's true in many different experiments with many different conditions that we have. So frequent and infrequent stimuli, positive and negative stimuli, first block, second block. Never mind how you analyze the data. If you look for individual differences, they're there and they're amazingly strong. In a bad day, we have a correlation of 0.7. In good days, we get a correlation of 0.95. Okay? Everyone who has ran breaking suppression studies in this room can go to his own data. You have it there. I have no doubt. Okay? In all of the experiments that we run, we have it. There are strong individual differences in how fast do our non-conscious processes prioritize information for consciousness. Where does this trait come from? We did the best we could. And as you can see from these graphs, we couldn't find anything. So we thought maybe fast people have fast non-conscious processes. No, it's not the case. It's not the case here. So fast categorization, so conscious categorization, non-conscious speed doesn't correlate. Maybe it has something to do with attention, we thought, so the Posner 3 networks of attention, so we ran the whole thing. Nothing, it correlates with nothing of attention. And then we thought, well, maybe, it has to do with threshold for decision making. So some of us need more information to decide, others less. So we did like a conscious task of threshold task. It doesn't correlate. So as it stands right now, we really don't understand where it comes from. We did everything we could, so if you guys have an idea, we would be more than excited to hear. Now you may think to yourself, but this is CFS. It's a very specific kind of task and rivalry, and who knows what drives speed in these kinds of tasks, okay? And so, okay, and make it in time, more or less. And so we had the same thought, and we developed what we call repeated mask suppression that I just revealed that Katerina developed too. It's trivial in many ways. So you do mask, stimulus, mask, stimulus, mask, stimulus. And it turns out that, if you run enough studies and breaking suppression in these studies, it has the same features of CFS. So upright faces become conscious before inverted faces. We replicated all sorts of findings from the CFS literature in RMS. And now we have two long duration paradigms in which you can look at non-conscious speed, right? So look at RMS. This is within RMS. So this is, never mind what these are, but as you can see, it's the exact same graphs you've seen before. So you see amazing correlation between subjects. So subjects who are fast in RMS in one condition are fast in another condition. If they're fast with faces, they're fast with houses and what have you. And you can see here that the correlations, get to 0.93 and 0.9. These are not correlations we ever see in the kinds of sciences that I do, anyway. But the main question here is not about RMS correlation. It's the question whether RMS correlates with CFS, whether we have a measure of something central non-conscious or whether it's unique to CFS. And fortunately, you see a very hefty correlation between the two tasks. So what we measure when we measure these individual differences cannot be something that is only about CFS or only about RMS. It has to do something that is true for both. Okay. Just promotion. We're excited by RMS because you can run masking studies online. So we have a package for you that you can use. It'll be ready, I think, in 2 weeks. You can run suppression studies in MTurk and online, and it's kind of fun. You run 300 subjects on a BRMS study. You have the data by tomorrow. It's simply great. So talk to me if you need it. It'll be ready soon, and it'll be relatively easy to use, and we'll help you use it. The second project. We started to look at animals' consciousness and non-conscious processing, right? And there are two animals here. This is the rhesus monkey, and this is Shai. And Shai has non-conscious processes, we know that. And he's an amazing postdoc that did this work and came up with the ideas to do this work. This is the tree of life, and Eva talked yesterday about how do you go about thinking about which types of animals have what type of consciousness. And we've been worried about where to put the boundaries and what to do with them. And I'll be talking about these kinds of animals where most of us are kind of certain that they have consciousness, although some would argue that we don't have direct evidence for consciousness in these animals. And we'll try to ask whether these animals also have the non-conscious processes that we argue are crucial to your conscious experiences. Okay? And so what Chai came up with is a simple yet ingenious idea. I think he took, so he looked at the, by now, 25 years old Jacobi studies where people have to do exclusion tasks. So if you're a subject in this task, we give you, let's say, SPI, and we ask you to fill in the word. We either prime you subliminally or supraliminally with the word spice, let's say. And the critical condition for us here today is an exclusion task where we tell you, if you saw this word when we primed it, don't use it when you give us the word here. Okay, so if you're primed with spice, don't do spice, do spike. Okay? And it turns out in humans that if you're asked to do this supraliminally, it's relatively easy. I can prime you with spice and you'll give me spike. In subliminal conditions as compared to control condition, you will use spice. So you process the word spice, you know it's there, and you cannot stop yourself from using it when you're asked to do the stem completion. So Shai basically said, okay, let's do that with the rhesus monkey, and he came up with the following paradigm. So you have a fixation, and then you have a cue, okay? And the cue is always incongruent. It predicts the location on which you will get the juice 100% of the time, okay? So if it appears here, the monkey has to fixate here, and he gets juice, okay? 100% of the time. And the question is, will we get a dissociation between subliminal priming and supraliminal priming in the monkey? Okay, and we compare it to a control condition where you have two non-predictive cues. So you don't know where to go if you see both stars. Here's the data from humans. You see that they can learn really fast. So this is the cue, this is the control condition. This is where you have a cue. Subjects become really fast. This subject actually moves his gaze before the thing arrives. So this is why you see 0. It's very robust. This is like the average of all subjects. Do monkeys learn how to do it? Yes, definitely. They're really good. So each line here is a monkey. There are 3. You don't see one of them because it's masked by the black one. But they learn to do it, and they're fast, and they're great. Okay? This is supraliminally. What happens in the subliminal condition? Well, this is the average. You see it's much more noisy. This is the average, and it's true for many of the participants. So subjects have a hard time refraining from getting stuck on the place in which the star appears. So they process the star, and they cannot use it to go to the other direction. The critical question, of course, is what happens with monkeys, and they show the exact same pattern. Okay? So now we have a dissociation between conscious and non-conscious processes in the monkey. Now, there was this paper in Science a few months ago, Stan, a few months ago, I don't know, where it was shown that subliminal primes do reach V1, I think, are processed by the monkey. But to the best of our understanding, this is the first time that anyone has shown that these things do not stop at V1 and can be used by the system to do something. So this is really non-conscious processing of the cue. Shai wasn't satisfied with this one paradigm, so he invented another one. In this one, it's not an RT task. So the previous one was an RT task. If you're the monkey, you know that even if you fixate to the wrong condition, the wrong side, you can then go to the right side. Here, they have to make a choice. So they have to go to the box with a star. Okay. In the subliminal condition, they're primed with a location or 2 stars, so you're not primed. Okay. Again, same kind of thing. These are just 2 humans. So this is the first stage in which they learn the task. Okay, you see that they learn really fast. This is accuracy, what you have here, and we stop them when they get to average accuracy of 80%. And so they learn really fast. They get to 80%, and then the cue becomes subliminal. And you can see this is running average of accuracy. And you can see that they're below chance when the cue is subliminal. The same is true for this human. We have a group of subjects, so it's true on the group level too. It's just for illustrations because I'm going to show you the monkeys now. And the monkeys look kind of the same. So it takes them longer to learn. This monkey took very long time to learn. There was one monkey who would not play our task at all. We had run hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of trials. He never got it. And then the cue becomes subliminal And the monkeys, like the humans, then become below chance. Okay? And so we have now evidence in two paradigms to show that monkeys show the dissociation between conscious and unconscious processes, and Leon is waving me with his hand. So I'll just stop here and I'll thank you guys for your attention.
So any unconscious thoughts about this?
So first of all, very interesting. I'm intrigued to see what you didn't show because you had to finish a beautiful study. I wanted to ask though, so the process dissociation procedure that you use, doesn't it show that conscious processes do have something special? Because for unconscious processes, they are not enough to make you change your strategy. But only when you see it consciously can you not give the word, or can you look at the cue in the different direction. So is that also something that we do unconsciously, but only for consciously perceived stimuli?
So yes and no, but I'll focus on the no because this is the answer you're looking for. So no, in the previous run, many years ago when I was interested in whether we can do these things consciously or non-consciously and do math and do reading and blah blah blah, I would say the following thing, and I would be right. I think, give me time. I'll train the monkeys, I'll train the humans, they'll learn how to do it. I can, you give me 5 years of a grant for a great PhD student, we'll make it happen. I don't think it's undoable. I don't think you want to do it. I don't think it's necessarily an interesting question, but if you ask me, is the function of being able to use a cue to go to another location, can this function happen unconsciously? I will have to say yes.
Of changing the strategy. Of using things in a non-stereotypical manner.
Yes, I don't think there's even one person in this room who thinks that conscious and unconscious processes do the same kind of things with the same efficiency in the same kind of way. There's no doubt about it.
That's the point, isn't it?
What?
If you can learn something unconsciously at a very low frequency, this is not adaptive. You will die in the wild. That's it. So it's not whether or not you can train after 5 years from now.
So if you're designing stop signs for a road, I would highly recommend that they're completely visible and non-masked by CFS, no doubt, right? No doubt. But if you want to argue that you have to have consciousness, it's the kind of argument that people make, that consciousness is necessary for X, then the answer would be no, it's not necessary for X. I can do these funny experiments in the lab and show you that you can stop like at 2% of the time. You can use the stop sign to stop. And in the rest 97% you'll be run over by the car.
Necessary means if you will die, that's it.
Yes, but if you can get it without consciousness, then it means that consciousness is not necessary for the function. In the strict logical sense, it's not necessary.
We live in a world this is not enough.
Yeah, well, I can say the same thing about our government, but
A technical and a conceptual question. The technical is, can you combine CFS with this other masking paradigm?
combine in what way?
So that you both do CFS, so one eye only sees the mask and the other eye seeing mask alternating with object.
Technically you can, we've never done it.
There will be, I think there's some advantages to doing that,
Okay.
which is you could see whether things kind of break in and break out, or things that you never noticed, and so forth. Anyway,
It's interesting.
that's a technical question. Then the conceptual question is, do you think that a musical thought is not conscious?
Non-consciously formed or non-conscious when you think it?
Non-consciously formed. I mean, you can always, in the trivial sense, of course, everything that is anything
Right.
began its life
Right.
without having become conscious. But I would just think that most musical thinking is conscious, and the reason I think that is because it has, it feels like something right as you're thinking it.
But the reason you think that all conscious musical thought is conscious is because you think about conscious musical thoughts. You're never aware of your non-conscious musical thoughts. It's exactly the point I was trying to make. So if you have non-conscious musical thoughts, you're not aware of them. So how can you... So we have to find a marker of non-conscious musical
That's the
thought?
trivial version.
Yeah. Oh.
Last question.
Yeah, I think I want to iterate questions that have been already raised. You may be aware of the fact that you had an unconscious thought without being aware of the content of it.
I think I agree, but I will argue that it's very infrequent.
But you can feel something in your body without without knowing, without being constantly aware of what caused it.
No, you know that there's something in your body, but let's say this something is pain, okay? And so you know that there's something in your body, you're aware of having something in your body, but I would say that if you're not aware of it as a pain, then you're not aware of having a pain. You're aware of having some sort of a sensation in your body. That's not pain.
You have to finish.
Thank you very much, guys.